So Stephen Heintz, President, Rockefeller Brothers Fund, and everyone is welcome to use their microphone here or stand up, whichever they prefer.
Oh, I guess I'll stand up. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Thank you, Senators, for organizing this workshop, seminar, and thanks to my fellow panelists. This is a terrific and diverse panel of professionals in the field and advocates and others who are really helping to move the needle on this extraordinarily important issue. And I'm really happy to be here to tell you a little bit about our story at the Rockefeller Brothers Fund. First, I need to open by making clear that the Rockefeller Brothers Fund is not an investment vehicle. It is, in fact, a foundation. It was created by the third generation of the Rockefeller family in 1940. The famous brothers that included the former governor of New York State, Nelson Rockefeller, and his four brothers. It is distinct from the Rockefeller Foundation, which was created in 1913 by their father and grandfather. So it's kind of a generational difference and also a scale difference. We are smaller than the Rockefeller Foundation. We, on the other hand, have one asset today that they don't have as much of, and that is the engagement of the Rockefeller family. Half of our board of trustees are members of the Rockefeller family, now representing the fourth and fifth generations of this extraordinary family. So we have been around for 75 years, and over the history of the fund, there have been three core areas of engagement. And we've confirmed this by studying our history during our 75th anniversary last year. And those three are a real concern about citizenship and democratic engagement, a passion for the environment, and a concern about international relations and peace. And although those three themes have had different manifestations during the 75 years to be contemporary with challenges of different periods in American and global history, they remain the three core issues that we work on today. We now call them democratic practice in the first instance, trying to strengthen the quality of American democracy. We have a few things to work on, I think we can all agree. But we're also interested in trying to help promote greater democracy in the institutions and mechanisms of global governance, of global decision making. Because increasingly in the globalization of the economy, decisions are being made by global actors that have huge impact at the local level. And yet the citizen has almost no information about them, no access to them, and no ability to influence them. So how do we create more democratic process in these very important global decisions? So that's the second part of that portfolio. In the environmental area, which started with the family's deep engagement in conservation, and as many of you know, they helped create several national parks as well as some state parks here in New York and elsewhere. But over the years, we moved to a deeper concern in ecosystem management, and today our environmental portfolio is exclusively about climate and energy, and it has been since 2005. And in the third area, peace building, we're involved in some of the conflicts in the greater Middle East. So for us, the issue of how we manage our endowment is existential. It's quite a bit different than the state comptroller's fiduciary responsibility to 1 million beneficiaries. And as a former official in state government in Connecticut, where I served as Commissioner of Economic Development, and I'm in the state pension plan of Connecticut, I understand the pressures that the state comptroller and Vicki Fuller feel in meeting those very, very serious responsibilities. Our endowment at the foundation gives us a bit more flexibility. And our endowment is considerably smaller. It's about today $825 million. But we manage it with the following investment goal in mind. We want to manage the investment of those funds so that we maintain the purchasing power equity of the fund over time, so that future generations can conduct philanthropy appropriate to their times and their assessment of the needs and challenges. So that means that under US law, we have to earn at least 5% a year plus inflation. And that's because federal law requires us to spend 5% of our assets each year in our grant-making programs. And in order to remain, at the same level in real terms, we have to also earn inflation. So in this market, and in the market that is, we think, likely to be with us for the foreseeable future, that's a challenge. Just getting 5% plus inflation is a really tough bar. Nevertheless, we started working on impact investing back in 2005, first through engagement, similar to what Vicki Fuller has described. We too filed shareholder resolutions, especially at ExxonMobil, which of course is the legacy company of Standard Oil, the company that John D. Rockefeller built and created the wealth that endowed our foundation. And because the family was so important to the history of that company, we were able to engage at the top level and had several meetings with the CEOs successively of ExxonMobil. And some of the shareholder resolutions we were engaged in also got significant votes at shareholder meetings, but nevertheless, we didn't feel we were really moving the needle very much through engagement. So we decided, rather than engage, we were going to move more actively to do two things. We started first with proactive investments, and we set aside 10% of the total value of our endowment for investments in the clean energy economy and other business solutions to global warming and other sustainable and socially impactful investments. And then we started later, and this was a journey. This is not something that happens overnight. These are difficult decisions, as Vicki has said, very, very complex decisions. If you're trying to manage your investments, at least to stay even. So we started the conversation around proactive investing, and then in 2014, at the beginning of the year, I said to the board, we really need to start thinking about divestment, because we, as a grant maker, have been one of the leading American foundations to support work on climate change much earlier than many of the others. We got started in the mid-1990s, funding climate research. And then as the research began to confirm that the climate crisis was indeed real, we moved to funding policy development, and then we moved to help support the development of business solutions and a lot of advocacy along the way. And I said to the board at the beginning of 2014, for us to be known as a leader in our climate-related grant making, and yet still be invested in the fossil fuel companies would be the equivalent of funding lung cancer research and being invested in tobacco. It's morally inconsistent, it's inappropriate, and the urgency of this challenge, the climate challenge, is the existential challenge of this century for the planet, for human civilization, and for all forms of life. But the moral argument didn't get us across the goalpost. It wasn't quite enough to convince the board. They were sympathetic, but they are also, they're watching the bottom line. They want to make sure our investments are going to produce the returns. And it was only when we were able to add convincing evidence in an economic case that we were able to make the decision to divest from fossil fuels. And that was aided by Mark Campanile, and you're going to hear from him later on in this panel. Mark leads an organization, a brilliant organization called Carbon Tracker, and we were one of the early funders of the Carbon Tracker initiative through our grant making. And he will tell you more about it, but basically the first rounds of their research began to prove quite conclusively that if we as a global civilization have any hope at all of remaining below the 2 degrees Celsius cap that the scientists tell us is imperative to avoid climate catastrophe before the end of this century, 60 to 80% of the known fossil fuel reserves, simply have to remain in the ground unburned. Because if we extract them and burn them, we have no chance of remaining below 2 degrees. So that means that these assets, in the term coined by Carbon Tracker, are stranded assets. They're on the books of these major energy companies. They're going to lose value, and these investments are increasingly going to be bad investments. So this economic argument, married to the moral argument, was what got our board of trustees willing to make the decision to divest completely from fossil fuels. Thank you. 1 minute. Sorry, it's a long and complex story. So we made the announcement that we were going to divest from fossil fuels the day after the fantastic People's Climate March here in New York in September of 2014. And we knew that the real value of our announcement was not that we were divesting $825 million, because that's not a very large sum of money. It was the symbolic value of the Rockefeller family saying that the fossil fuel world has to come to an end urgently. And we're doing what we can to do it, despite the fact that it was our ancestor who created the fossil fuel industry and our wealth, by the way. So the story went global in a way that even surprised us. And not only was it symbolically important, but it began to send important market signals. We had 2 funds, and I will end with this, Senator, I do not mean to filibuster. We had been engaged in conversations and due diligence with 2 funds prior to that divestment decision, but since they had holdings in fossil fuels, we had turned them down. I wasn't going to increase our fossil fuel exposure as I was trying to convince the board to divest. After we announced, about 6 weeks later, I got a call from both of them saying, we saw your announcement, one was in Brazil, you hit the front pages of the newspapers in Brazil. We are now thinking about organizing a fossil fuel-free fund, and if we do, would you consider it? And of course we did, and in fact, after a very intensive due diligence process, we invested. This has now happened twice. We now have, of our $800 million, over 100 million investments in impact investments that are going to, in our view, return market rates and still help with the climate crisis. We have another 200 million that are following ESG principles more broadly. We've reduced our fossil fuel exposure from nearly 7% to just over 3.1%, and we're moving down as we can in a prudent way. And our goal is to demonstrate that this is possible and still achieve the returns, because we can take that risk. And if we can demonstrate it, maybe we can help Vicky Fuller and others to do it later. Thank you very much.